Sea dragons, pirates, sea serpents, wizards. The Black Claw and Red Claw Island clans are on the brink of war. A young islander named Derek risks everything to prove his worth as a sailor. Adventure awaits and the ride of his life. But there are far deadlier things than pirates on the open sea. A wizard begins to raise sea serpents from the depths. Can Derek learn to harness the growing power within himself in time? Dive into this epic fantasy adventure filled with magic, hope, and peril. Smell the salt on the wind as dragon and serpent dive below the crystal blue waters in this exciting prequel to the Dragon Sea Chronicles. After the prequel, pre-order Book 1 of Dragon Sea Chronicles, Mage Reborn, available right now, wherever ebooks are sold. Hi everybody, Tim here. The episode awaits, but first some quick business. I have some books out there, or soon to be out there, on Amazon.com. And I think you might be interested in them if you're listening to these shows, because they're all about the fantasy, the strangeness, the weird situations that you encounter in fiction all the time. So without further ado, let me get to telling you some of the release dates, because we got books out there. First of all, there's my high fantasy series, The Spells of the Curtain, an epic story told across multiple novellas. Book 1, Court Mage, is out on August 1st, and it'll set you back 99 cents. If you don't have Kindle Unlimited, and you can read it for free in Kindle Unlimited. It's sequel. The sequel to Court Mage, Battle Mage, is out on the 7th of August, and the third book, Winter Mage, will be out on August 14th. The other series I have going is a post-apocalyptic science fiction called The Root Conspiracy, and book 1 is already out. It's called Memory Lost. It's also available in Kindle Unlimited, 99 cents if you have to pay actual money, other than your subscription. And then book 2, Mind Chase, just came out last Friday, so give that a try as well. The third book comes out on August 3rd, and it's called Image Storm. So that series will be receiving more books down the line, but I'll get back to you about those. So for now, onward, and enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to Of Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 99 of the podcast.
Today, we'll be talking about defending. A lot of times in RPGs, players are often the ones that go through dungeons, or they go into another area to, fight the baddie. They're usually on the offense. But what happens when you start going into defense? What happens if you decide to hold the line, if your players decide to hold the line, or you put their players in a position where they need to stop whatever's coming?
Yeah, that's the core of the idea, is that the players are protecting something or someone. In this case, they're a choke point, maybe even. Like that. I think the classic example of this is the reverse dungeon kind of thing, where the player characters are the goblins or the monsters in the dungeon, and there are a bunch of player characters, like the standard player characters, the elf, the dwarf, and whatever, the wizards, all attacking their dungeon home, and they have to defend. And that's kind of a classic joke thing that D&D did back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was they made some sort of card game about that, right? Where you develop your dungeon boss, I think it's called, where you put obstacles so these heroes get wrecked in your dungeon.
I haven't heard of that, but that's interesting. Definitely, I think they called it the reverse dungeon originally, but there's been a fair number of things like that. I think there's some video games that are similar as well, where you maybe you may not be defending, but you play the bad guys and you have evil minions and stuff that you create, that kind of thing. So. But even when players are not the monsters, like the monsters aren't the only things that defend places. You have a siege, the castle's under attack. That's a pretty standard situation in a fantasy setting. You could have your, defense in space, and the space opera setting is tougher. But you have the gang defending its turf.
Yeah,
people moving in. You're protecting, or there's a specific member of the gang of the mafia, say, who's people are trying to hit.
And even there is in horror, you have the Evil Dead, where you're all just kind of cooped up in a cabin, and you just have to survive until morning or something.
Right. That's cabin in the woods, exactly, that kind of thing. So the aggressive force in this case is usually something, it's obviously the opponent, but it can be almost anything. It could even be a force of nature if you really want to go that way. It'd be kind of tough to do most RPGs as just a force of nature attacking. Usually it's going to be some kind of monster or human enemy. But because just by its nature, that those things offer a little more depth of conflict because they react to people, right? They react to what the character, the players do. The players have to try to outwit them and stuff like that. So there's player planning and counter planning. And I think that's really fascinating. I think that'd be really cool. Kind of, again, going to the Castle Ravenloft example that I've pulled out from time to time, where the player where the character of Strahd, the vampire, is supposed to be played like a player character. He's very aggressive. He's going around doing his own things. That could easily, even that in a module like that, that could result in the players ending up being on the defensive because they just can't win in a given situation. They gotta just hold out until morning, and then Strahd's gone because he's a vampire. Just leave. That kind of thing. I think it's a very dynamic situation, and it's more than just bottles. It's more than just characters being stuck in one location. So because there's ways to, but if you have a location with a lot of depth, it can be really amazing too.
Well, here's something that's very fascinating to me when it comes to defending is it really does become like almost a game master versus player type idea, because say that you have your players defending a castle.
Right.
So, and they make, you have them go out and make preparations against or let's take it that they have to defend a house. They have to defend a house from some, marauding horde of some sort. Mm-hmm. So, they board up the windows, they do all this stuff. So that's when, as a game master, you find the chinks in the armor. So you actually think like a general, like, okay, the windows are boarded up. They have not defended the ground. So what if I have people tunnel into the basement? So there's that option. And if they, deal with that wave, then, you could send another wave to break through the door. If that doesn't work, then you can always be like, wait, they're stuck in there. What if I start like just throwing fire in there? Then they have to deal like in a different way. They have to be taking care of fires. They have to put out fires. They have to repair damaged blockades. It really is a chess match in that way, where they have to act, react, and then say that the players want to sally out and take on the enemy. Mm-hmm. Then they have to do that.
Yeah. No, is it fair to say that these scenarios you're talking about? Because I agree with you very much. But these different scenarios where we have the characters, say trapped in a house, but do you think that having a single encounter where the players are on the back foot defending really counts as what we're talking about here? Or is it more of you're in a place, you're under siege more? Is that more kind of what we're talking about in general?
Well, that's where I took it.
I think
you
that's
have
more interesting. Yeah. Personally.
Well, it's like, because there's going to be oftentimes like, in Call of Cthulhu, when you're getting chased by a Shoggoth, you're on the defense.
That's true.
So there's that's defense. You're out there and you're just being defensive for this type. You're making a block as opposed to turtling up. Whereas when I think of defense with player characters, that's where like, okay, these people cannot get to this magical amulet or whatever, because if they do, then they're going to have the end of the world.
Yeah, and I think the distinction here is more just how much time is being spent, really. It's like how much depth is going into the defense. The defensive part is most of the adventure, or a good chunk of the mission. Then you're going to have to supply more depth for it, just like anything else you're going to spend a lot of time on. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I feel like it's even if it's just like one gigantic enemy versus a group of 5 player characters, making it that we have to keep this thing at bay. We have to, divert the thing. We have to draw its attention elsewhere, so this place will be safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and the cool thing about this is it goes back to the tactics stuff, the strategic or general kind of thinking, generalship, where where your player characters are a team. The players are working together to come up with what their characters' plans are, and they're going to be trying everything to survive, right? Because their lives are probably on the line if we're talking about defense most of the time, but also they obviously most of the time they're going to have some other objective that they want to achieve, right? Like we can't let them get past us. Could be part of the objective. Like say they're guarding a gate between a mountain pass, and then if the only way through is if the bad guys go through the gate. But it's possible the players could survive that and still fail in their mission, which I think is kind of also an intriguing situation because we've talked about failure before and how the possibility of failure is more interesting when it's not the end of the game every time. So, yeah, I think that, yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. Like if there's a gigantic battle that, well, I'm thinking of the Alamo right now, where that the Alamo got wiped. All the defenders got wiped out, but it became a rallying cry. So if the players want to come back, then they could be like, "Remember Castle so and so," or if they were survivors of that, then maybe this gives them motive to redeem themselves. Yeah, I feel like failure to defend something, and having to deal with the consequences of that will be lead to a more interesting story.
Right. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about a couple episodes ago with the quest for peace. You start in a place that's really bad. If you like for the players, like things get bad for them. Like if you start a campaign with the players defending a gate gets busted, bad things are going on. Then they've got to deal with trying to put the stuff back through the gate that they got in through it, or whatever, or got out through it. So there's definitely that aspect. And just because your game is taking place in your campaign, your session, or maybe even a part of your campaign is taking place largely in one location, that doesn't mean there's not stuff to explore there. As much as I like to rag on it, Babylon 5, the TV series, it's pretty mixed bag. But the thing is, that all takes place on a space station, and so it's a space opera series, takes place mostly on a space station, and or Deep Space Nine is also similar in this way. They're basically similar shows where the players are usually on the heroes in those shows are usually on the back foot. They're defending this space station in each case, and they're working to maintain this space station, but then. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you don't know about the space station, about the people who are on the space station, that kind of thing. And it's you can do that with any location. That's what I'm trying to say. And it doesn't even have to be a populated location, at least not populated by people for the most part. It could be like, okay, we're protecting this gateway. We'll just go back to the gate, but maybe there's something buried under it or similar. There's a catacomb underneath, and there's like an idea there where you can have a mix of both worlds if you've got a D&D campaign where. You're like, yeah, the gate's up top, but then underneath there's a dungeon. There's this never-ending dungeon, similar to Castle Greyhawk or something like that. There's a whole campaign idea right there. But anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. Point is, you can learning stuff about the place. I think is a cool idea. Having to learn stuff about the place to defend it better is also cool and can work on any scale. If say you like with your house example, the house example. Where they bore the bad guys tunnel into the basement, and then the player characters maybe they didn't even realize there was a basement when they came in. Because
there we are. Sorry, Tim. I totally pressed the mute button by accident. I was wondering, but how would you play? How would you run a defense like that?
Okay, like which one?
As a game master, like for example, the gate. How would you set your players up to defend in a gate? Like, what is the AI of the NPCs, I should say? What is what are the challenges that you would throw at them?
Yeah. So in the fantasy example, it's pretty. This is a good question because the thing is you don't want to be too all knowing because you know everything the players are doing and they don't know anything you're doing a lot of the time. They only know what you tell them. And that's why you have this huge advantage to create, but you have to, but I personally, I would use that advantage to create drama rather than to beat them down, because it's so easy to beat them down. It's like, okay, they're in one place, they can't really run away, or if they do, they lose anyway. So it's important to make the encounters that you make the enemies that are attacking interesting and also not all powerful. That's, I think, but they also should be, they gotta be a threat, but they can't be all powerful, because if they are, or if there's such a big threat that the players, that you don't want to overpower the players with just overwhelming force, at least not to begin with, right? Because that kind of defeats the purpose of things.
So once you play it as in a wave, here's wave 1, here's wave 2, which is worse, here's wave 3, which is going to be weird, here's wave 4, et cetera, and just until you get the desired result where they either are beaten back or it almost seems like you'd play it as a war game, wouldn't you?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you just remind me.
I should probably clarify. Yeah, I should probably clarify that I didn't have you on mute. I muted myself, and there was a section when you were talking that I was like, Tim, wait, Tim. Oh, he can't hear me. That's why.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you were just being the rudest thing, and I was like, oh no, I'm not. I can't. He can't hear me.
I was wondering. I was like, I'm just carrying on here. I hope I'm not boring them. But that was very unlike you, Rob, to be silent for so long. So.
Exactly, yeah.
But now everyone knows what happened. So, so
I'm sorry. So you're going to say it's like the old
movie 300.
300, yeah.
Because they're defending this pass, the gates of fire, the hot gates or whatever, the Spartans at Thermopylae. But of course, in this comic book version of it, basically, this comic book movie version of it, we have, elephants, and we have, first we got waves of guys, we got elephants, we got a rhino, we got all this stuff that the Persians bring to bear on them. And that's a pretty good example. Like you were saying, the first wave is just kind of standard. It gives you the enemy's feeling you out, trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe they're scouts. Maybe they're just the light troops that the enemy feels like they can afford to lose because they don't know what the defense is like. Or maybe, and then, not or maybe. And then the second wave is like, well, okay, they're getting more serious. And third wave being weird. I think that was actually an insightful thing, even though maybe you were throwing that out at random. I like the idea of doing of conceiving of the waves not as single things, because I think a wave thing makes sense, like stages of attack. So stage 1 might be, say a goblin horde. Stage 1 might be just goblins. Stage 2 is some bigger goblins. Stage 3 might be, so stage 1 is regular goblins. Stage 2 is hobgoblins, say, for D&D examples. Even though that's kind of silly because they're just saying they're just bigger, meaner goblins. So anyway, But then stage 3, maybe they release wolves they sneak up they wolves and they just somehow get those on top of the gate to attack with. Or something, or they start throwing boulders from above, from the mountains. So, doing something unusual actually more often, probably every wave should have something unusual going on. But I think it makes the most sense if you do that. If you do some big twist wave or something once multiple stages of attack that makes sense. And that's the other thing; they got to make sense in the context of the setting and pulling stuff out of your ass, like somehow the way. Like I said before, obviously, this is kind of redundant, but if the goblins, in our example here, should not have an archmage who suddenly shows up and just vaporizes the barrier, obviously. But even if the goblins also probably shouldn't have a bunch of dwarves working for them unless you've already figured that out. Because dwarves and goblins don't like each other.
I'm kind of like putting myself into the attacker's point of view.
Okay.
What I'm finding is, number one, if I was to run a game like that where, I have goblins to attack these defenders on this gate, what I probably figure out is, number one, how many NPCs do I have in my army?
Yes.
Number two, the attrition rate, how's my supply lines? So it really is almost getting into war game territory here.
Yeah, and not small war games. We're talking grand strategy stuff, and I think you're right.
Yeah, totally. I miss
idea there, yeah.
And number three, maybe hiring mercenaries, or maybe it's different command. And, maybe it's my goal as a general is not so reliant on getting the gate. Maybe it's wasting time here so that I have enough time for my other army to go around and attack from the flank.
Yeah.
Because that'd be nasty.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden the scouts are like, hey, so half of them are on the hill. What have we been doing this entire time?
Right, right. Like half of them are gone now. Wow, they moved out. Now where are they? And
Mhm.
maybe they're heading for another pass to the mountains if we're using that example, or maybe they can be doing any number of things. Maybe they're just pillaging the land around.
Yeah, so it really kind of puts you into a different mindset instead of, here's three bad guys versus three good guys, or
Yeah,
here's who's in the castle and you have to fight all those guys. It really does put you into a different, like,
yeah, it's a
okay,
different
if I
headspace.
was a
Yeah,
player character, yeah, what would I be doing here?
yeah, because you have to think more proactively as the game master in this case, because you got to instead of planning a room, a series of rooms, which is like a flow chart, right? They go here, then they can go to either of these two places, etc. You're planning an event, more of a sequence. It's still very flowchartish. Like, what if the goblins take the gate on the first try? Well, then the game's completely different. But say the goblins
Oh, yeah, totally.
breach the gate, they break a hole in it, and now they're going to try other plans to exploit that hole. Right? It's that kind of thing. That you can flowchart out the results, but you've got it. But you're kind of doing it in reverse, right? Because the players have, or even two competing flowcharts, right? If
Hmm.
this, then that, but then also if this, then that, except unless the players have set up the catapult in the tower, and now they can take down the siege weapons before those siege weapons are built, or set up.
Yeah. And this is also a kind of a good reminder that it's probably not the best if you're not too confident in your
Mm-hmm.
wargaming abilities. This is not time to pull out. Oh, he is the greatest general of all time,
Yeah,
and he is going to destroy you. And he just keeps on attacking the front.
right. You don't want to. You don't want this guy to. You don't want your opponent to come off as unbelievable, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so make sure you should probably not. It's kind of like a player playing a character that is way more intelligent than them, and if they're not that, if they have a hard time even imagining how intelligent this person would be, or playing that, don't you should probably not play that character. That's maybe, or for example, but it goes the same with generalship. If you're not a good at tactics, you don't have any military history background or something, maybe you should make your opponents either monsters or just plain less good at generalship until you can do some research.
Oh yeah, totally. Because that'd be fun if these were like, because that adds a different flavor. Like fighting a general that is, fighting Rommel
Mm-hmm.
or fighting Hannibal is going to be a lot different than fighting Crassus.
Right. Yeah. Crassus, the guy who wasn't a general, right? He had a lot of money. Then he goes out east
Yeah,
with his Roman army, and
I'm going to take over Parthia because I like Parthia.
Yeah. Yeah, Parthia. Yeah, right. Like, I'm gonna
Nope.
conquer Parthia. Yeah. It didn't work so well. But
Nope.
it's just like, that's an understatement. But yeah, it's a great example. It's a great idea that you want to put the character in the opposing force, and it doesn't always have to be that they're a supreme general who's great at conquering things. They're not always Napoleon or Julius Caesar. Sometimes they're going to be, or they could. I mean, maybe they're just Ulysses S. Grant, right? Maybe they're just Grant, and they have a lot of guys at their disposal, and they know how to use that. But or maybe they're even worse, and they're one of the earlier Union generals who didn't know anything about being, or who would just no match for the Confederate generals earlier in the war.
Oh, like what was it? Pope? That was a really fucked up one. Like
there were a lot of them actually. There was like Hooker and
Burns.
Polk.
Yeah. Was Burnside a bad one, or was he one of the better ones? I forget.
Well, there were like 3 or 4, maybe at least 2 or 3 supreme general, high command generals that Lincoln fired because they were not doing it. I don't remember all of them. There were a lot of them actually. So, but there was a background for that because at West Point's in Virginia. That's at the time. That's where all the generals got trained, and then they felt loyal to Virginia. So that's why most Union generals weren't. So that there's this backstory in our world, and you can do similar things in your world, right? What if so the players maybe are in a situation where they are where their side is smarter than you, the DM, and your forces? That could be really liberating in a way, because then you don't have to play smart. You can just play with what resources you have, or your characters in the game have.
Or if you give the the big bad general that's coming after you like a really good motivation, like Hannibal, like his father was killed by Rome, and so he was like, there's absolutely no way whatsoever that I'd ever like take it easy on Rome. I'm going to annihilate these motherfuckers from the face of the earth.
Yeah. And it's just also the other thing is consider the hardship that your enemy army, your attacking army, or your forces have to go through if they're human or human-like, and not supernatural creatures or whatever. Then you've got to deal with like Hannibal's a great example here. He marched through swamps, he went over mountains, he did all this crazy stuff just to get to Rome by land, basically, or mostly by land.
And ended up taking out most of his elephants and losing his eye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like he lost his eye. That's what I was thinking about. To disease, I believe. In this, yeah. So it's this kind of he's a great character from history, but also a great example of a character that making if the players are playing the Romans, this is a guy who's good at messing with them and who's also incredibly tenacious, and that's kind of a cool character to play. Though again, you could be a foppish guy from you could have this like foppish elite dude who doesn't really know anything about commanding troops. That could be the bad guy, or it could be the PC superior if we're talking like a war game scenario here. The person whoever sent them to protect this thing. Maybe there's a reason there's only 4 people guarding this critical point. I mean, if there's only 4 players, if the player characters are the only characters at the defensive point, maybe it's because the point's really small. Yeah. And that's the other thing. Actually, you got to worry about the NPCs on the player side too if you're going to deal with a larger, like a Helm's Deep kind of situation, like Lord of the Rings. But I think it's more. I really think it's more compelling when the players are alone or mostly alone on the front, and therefore it's important to keep your state. Like we're talking about armies and stuff here, but you can keep it a little slower scale if you don't want to deal with a ton of NPCs. And I think that's a very reasonable option to take. Especially depending on the kind of game you have. Like if you're playing a superhero game, maybe you can have an army attacking 4 people at a barrier or whatever,
Oh yeah, and just have like someone just bop, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam, 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 bam.
Yeah, maybe they're like 5,000 normal people. They're not getting through that. There's 4 superheroes on the wall.
Totally.
Anyway, let's see. I think we're about out of time. Wow, that one.
Yeah. Quick. Well, is there anything you want to add, Tim?
Not really. I think we did this one.
Cool. Well, this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can email us at podcast@mentalcellarpublication.com. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at StageHat. Tim's at TNeederwriter. You can like us on Facebook. You can find this podcast wherever podcasts can be found.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Oh, and our 100th episode is coming up, but it won't be next week. So just keep that in mind. We've got some special episodes in the can for you. So enjoy those, and we'll talk to you soon.